In May 2025, Nintendo updated their privacy policy to reflect changes, including to address the impact of game chat. Their privacy aspects are ones that I've been interested in for some time, and this seems like a good as time as any to deep dive Nintendo's actual policies for data management and privacy. First of all, we must acknowledge that this is a difficult area with different regulations across regions, and we will see some differences between the American, European, and potentially the Japanese regulations as we go. It can also be quite difficult to disaggregate the many separate privacy policies that Nintendo operate for different purposes. The UK site alone has a website privacy policy, a privacy policy for promotions and events, a social media privacy policy, a privacy policy for the eShop, but not a cohesive and singular privacy policy. The US does have a single policy titled Privacy Policy, although it still has policies in place for the website, social media, and promotions and events for good measure. In the interests of simplicity, therefore, I thought in this case it would be worth delving into the newly revised policy with the simple generic name of Nintendo Privacy Policy and compare it to its nearest equivalent in the EU, and then at the end talk about what I can glean of the Japanese equivalent. In the case of the American policy, this appears to apply to America and Canada and possibly the wider Americas only, but it isn't entirely clear. This is the only instance of this policy existing on the web, and no specific reference is made in the policy to which regions are directly affected, although the emails at the end regarding further information link back to Nintendo of America. The website recommends going to region-specific Nintendo sites, and there are references within it both to the US and to Quebec. It appears that the Nintendo account privacy policy is the closest EU equivalent, and we will look at that in due course because actually comparing the two policies will be very instructive in helping us to fill in some of the gaps and firm up some of the woollier statements in the US document. Nevertheless, I thought that one way to deep dive Nintendo's privacy policy would be to make a radical step seldom undertaken. Even as these policies blend into so much white noise and paperwork, I thought, and bear with me here, but I thought it might be worth reading the privacy policies because that's the kind of high octane YouTube sensationalism that this channel is all about. Let's find out then exactly what Nintendo is hiding in plain sight with these privacy settings. Disclaimer up front, I am not a lawyer and do not have a legal background, let alone in the specifics of these kinds of regulations, so any musings are my own. Also, while I'm looking at this from the perspective of privacy, privacy is really only one aspect to consider when utilizing a web service. Safety, stability, and in Nintendo's case particularly, making a delightful user experience should all be factored in. For many, it's convenient to get a custom game recommendation, to be able to hang out with friends in Animal Crossing New Horizons, and, particularly for me recently, to be eligible to purchase a Switch 2 direct from Nintendo because of their existing data on me. While I will be examining the scope of their data collection with a somewhat critical eye in these videos since that's the topic of the policy, that's not to say that these uses aren't justifiable and perhaps optimal in the view of many people. But whether you consider yourself an open book or look at Nintendo data collection as the Eye of Sauron, we should probably know what Nintendo are about. The first part is pretty boilerplate. Your privacy is important to us, the time-honored way to start such a policy. They then say our privacy policy is designed to help you understand the information that we collect, how we use it and share it, how it is protected, and how you can access, correct, or delete your information. This policy covers our use of information that can or could be used to identify you, but it does not cover information which cannot be used to identify you. This policy applies to all Nintendo services that directly reference or link to it, but does not apply to Nintendo services that link to separate privacy policies, end quote. Okay, so already we are in to the murky netherworld of policy soup. One would assume that this is the policy that we will see when using the service, but it's not necessarily the case, as they could have links to different policies at different times, and so this is not a blanket statement of intent. To be fair, as I say, this is likely a required legalistic wording, and I don't blame Nintendo for it exactly. It's just a pity that, especially for a company like Nintendo, which deals with families and children, a more broadly applicable set of principles couldn't be employed. First, then, they list categories of information we collect, and believe it or not, there are 8 different types. Firstly, they say there is information that you provide to us. When you register for and use our services, we collect the information that you provide to us. This may include information like your name, email address, postal address, phone number, date of birth, country of residence, language, and gender. I think the may include is covering themselves for most eventualities. The second thing they collect is information about your device. They say, when you use our services, we may collect specific information about your device and across your devices, such as the model, serial number, operating system, device settings, device performance, device and advertising identifiers, internet service provider, IP address, and other unique personal or online identifiers. If you or your device experiences an error, we collect information about the error, the time the error occurred, the application or features being used, the state of the application when the error occurred, and any communications or content provided at the time the error occurred. End quote. While I appreciate the necessity and the convenience of this in many instances, this is an incredibly broad swathe of information. Any communication being provided seems like it could potentially include content through game chat, though a lot more on this later. Also, while collecting information on the Switch console used to access Nintendo content is, I guess, understandable, the policy contains references to essentially tracking cookies and other items that seem more likely to reflect phone and web content. Other unique personal or online identifiers especially gives them an open door to almost anything, including tracking IDs for Apple, Facebook, and other third-party tools. Unlikely to be included, but never explicitly ruled out, are things like keystroke dynamics, biometric identifiers like fingerprints, voice prints, and retina scans. They also collect information about your use of our service. They say, we collect information about your use and interaction with our services. This could include information about the account you use to access our services, your gameplay, your online status, your service use history, your connections and interactions with other users, the content you share, the date and time and duration of your use or visit, information about the links you click, pages you view, and advertising you interact with within our services, inferences used to create a profile about your preferences and characteristics, standard server log information, and other information about how you use our service. End quote. Basically, everything is connected. Your gameplay is particularly vague as a statement, encompassing potentially which games you play, but also what you are doing within each game. More on this a little bit later on again. They go on, your content. Our services may allow you to create, upload, or share content, such as text, images, audio, video, your nickname and user icon, or other content that you create or is licensed to you. With your content and to enforce our terms, we may also monitor and record your video and audio interactions with other users. When you use any of our services that include these or other similar capabilities, we may collect your content in accordance with our terms of use and this policy. Okay, so this is the big bit that relates to game chat. You do need to provide specific consent to be recorded, but also they require the recording to enforce terms, and so there's no practical way to be compliant with the terms if you don't consent. The statement monitor and record is incredibly broad, covering potentially metadata being beamed back to NCL in Japan, to algorithmic checking of what's happening, to developers being able to look in on your chat and recent recordings. And again, we will see with a little bit more specificity what this could look like when we get to the European specifications. Realistically, it seems impossible to imagine that there isn't some hapless employee or set of employees somewhere being given the job of examining video feeds to identify whether explicit content is being adequately and fairly enforced. Of course, the same necessity also opens up the risk of a more severe invasion of privacy, and so one would hope that Nintendo employees in this position of responsibility would be thoroughly vetted and trained, and of course, Nintendo's legal teams aren't called ninjas because they like pizza and shout cowabunga. It's ultimately for gamers to be aware that when you put a literal camera in your room, things will be picked up, and to be fair, Nintendo recently put a video on Nintendo Today showing how the camera could be deactivated with a warning light showing when it is broadcasting. More of an issue in some respects is audio, but here I think the wording is quite good. This is not an Amazon Alexa thing where it instantly listens to absolutely everything and then passes it for relevancy. You can create or upload audio content, which would include, presumably, things within games, and they are only to be used with advanced consent, taking audio specifically for game chat purposes. They also do put in wording that specifies the precise use of any of these monitoring activities, which are to enforce our terms. So, in theory, therefore, it shouldn't be the case that you have a conversation about needing more potassium in your diet, and the next minute get a push notification for Donkey Kong Bonanza. Still, the remit is fairly broad, and while they refer to the terms of service, if you think the terms of service narrow this down somewhat, well, no, they just refer you to this document on privacy. I won't read the next section that explains that they may need credit card details and a billing address for purchases, but check out this on location and health information. They say, location information. With your consent, we may collect and process information about your precise location. When we have your location information, we use it to tailor our services for you and others, like allowing you to play location-based games or helping you establish friend relationships with other users. Health information. With your consent, we may collect certain health information such as the number of steps taken or distance walked. We do not use this information for marketing or advertising purposes. End quote. I like that they clarify they don't use the information for marketing or advertising purposes, but the fact that they rule out rather than rule in this in itself is telling. They can certainly use your Ring Fit health data to see how the game is performing and the profile of the kinds of people playing it, even if they can't find the 20% most chubby users and advertise them Mario cookies. Although, what a perverse anti-fitness incentive that would be. Finally, they refer to the impressively vague information from other sources, which they clarify is as follows. We may also receive information about you from other sources, including from other users of our service, the third-party services and organizations. For example, if you access any social media or similar services through our services to log in or share information about your experiences on our services with others, we may collect information from these third-party services. We may also combine the information received from these other sources with information we've collected from you. End quote. Long story short, they can build up an incredibly robust picture of who is using their services from name, age, location, let alone inferred data like game playing habits. This isn't unique to Nintendo, of course, this is standard across many tech products and services, but it is as well to be informed. Let's move on then to section 2, and I will quote again. Section 2, how we use your information. We use your information to deliver, maintain, and improve our services, including for the performance of troubleshooting, data analytics, testing, research, statistical analysis, and surveys. We also use your information to provide you with services that you request, develop new services, suggest personally relevant features, offer you customized content, allow you to participate in interactive features, manage your account, provide you with tailored advertising, send you promotional materials from us or our affiliates and trusted business partners, keep our services, business, and users safe and secure, comply with applicable laws and regulations, prevent fraud, enforce our terms, and to protect or exercise our legal rights or defend against legal claims. Whenever you contact us, we use the information that you provide us to help resolve issues that you might be having when you use our service. We may use cookies or other similar technologies on some features of our services. We also may permit our third-party service providers to set cookies and similar technologies within our services to perform various analytics functions and to provide you with targeted advertisements that may be relevant to you. To learn more about how we or our third-party service providers may use these cookies and to manage your preferences as they relate to the collection and use of cookies across our website, go here, and there is a link which I'll talk about in a second. We do not and will not sell your information to third parties. However, we permit third-party service providers to collect your information as described here through some of our services, and we share your information with third-party service providers for business purposes as described in this policy, including but not limited to providing advertising on our services and elsewhere based on users' online activities over time and across different sites, services, and devices. End quote. Okay, so there is an awful lot in there. A lot of the usage cases are standard, such as customizable content and provision of services, but they also include research, statistical analysis, and sharing data with third parties. The thing is, even if Nintendo don't sell the data, they don't really need to do so, as the fact that they have such huge amounts of data reserves from their millions upon millions of active users means that Nintendo can certainly exert leverage on those partners. The fact that your Nintendo game can be micro-targeted to you means they can justify, if required, the 30% hosting fees on the eShop and potentially further increases. This profits them indirectly. Mention of research does suggest that they will use at least aggregate data usage information when considering how they will design future systems. Not that there's anything intrinsically wrong with that as long as you're happy, but it is worth bearing in mind. Okay, the next section is how this information is shared. First on the list is authorized third-party service providers, with them saying, we may share some or all of the categories of your information as identified above with third-party service providers that provide services to us for a variety of business purposes, such as payment processing, customer service, email deployment, advertising and marketing, including counting ad impressions, analyzing website clicks, verifying positioning and quality of ad impressions, ensuring compliance with industry standards, ads delivery, reporting, personalization, audience segmentation, and analytics, security enhancements, fraud prevention, performance monitoring, maintaining or servicing accounts, processing or fulfilling orders and transactions, information hosting, auditing, and information processing. End quote. Now, look, it's clear that a lot of these would be necessary and we understand why they're required, but that's still a very large pool of potential purposes and users, from technical partners like DNA, who also work with Nintendo on their mobile networks, to distribution partners and their legal teams. Having said that, almost any kind of service is likely to have similar stipulations. They also note, we sometimes share your information within our family of Nintendo companies. Nintendo themselves have significant bases in Japan, the US, Canada, France, Germany, and toeholds in several more. This next one is fairly standard. Legal purposes. We may share your information to comply with legal processes, respond to claims or inquiries, enforce our terms, or protect and defend the rights, property, or personal safety of our operations, our users, or the public. In other words, they can use the information that they collect from you against you or against others in order to protect their own property and safety. However, the one after this is particularly eyebrow-raising. Business transfers. We may share your information as part of a substantial corporate transaction, such as a sale or transfer of company assets, a merger, consolidation, or as otherwise legally permitted. Now look, I don't think that this wording is indicative of an imminent buyout from Disney, though I do have a past video where I've looked into when Disney tried just that. But I suppose it's logical to have this in the event that they sell subsidiaries or make any kind of deals. Otherwise, the sharing of data could become an 11th hour legal block on proceedings, which would be very tricky. Then we have, quoting again, other users and the public. Some of our services allow you to share your information and content with other users or engage in public activities. When you choose to use these services, the information or content that you share, your nickname, your user icon, your online status, your country of residence, your reported age range, the type of gaming console you are using, and your gameplay information may be visible to Nintendo and its trusted business partners, other Nintendo users, and in some cases, the public. Please keep in mind when you use these services that the information and content that you choose to share may be read, collected, or used by others or the public. You are fully responsible for the information and content that you choose to share in these instances. End quote. Now, clearly, this will be the case in large-scale multiplayer games, although obviously not all of these data points will be visible in all circumstances, but it is something that Nintendo wants to flag past you. Then we have, if you access third-party services, such as third-party online gaming services and social media services, through our services, these third-party services may be able to collect information directly from you or about you, including information about your activity on our services, and they may notify your connections on the third-party services about use of our services in accordance with their own privacy policies. So this is fair enough when we appreciate that there is a limit to how far Nintendo can control privacy when interfacing with, let's say, third-party apps such as YouTube's or contractors such as the people who run their websites. Finally, they give themselves the leeway to keep asking by saying they may collect information with your consent, adding, "We may share information for any other purposes disclosed to you at the time we collect the information or pursuant to your consent." So here, pursuant to your consent is just the legalistic way of saying that you would need to agree for anything deeper first. I'm trying to think, though, of what kind of data might be shareable that isn't already covered here, because there's a lot of data that Nintendo will already be collecting. Still, Nintendo does have a section on your controls, choices, and rights. It's much shorter than the others. Let's read and then talk about it. We offer you certain controls and choices regarding the information we collect, how the information is used, and how it is shared. These controls and choices include the ability to update, correct, or delete information that you have provided to us or information that we have collected through your use of our services. They also include the ability to opt out of receiving notifications, promotions, offers, or other advertising from us. You have the right to request access to, correction, or deletion of your information. For instructions on how to submit a request, go here. We will not discriminate against you for exercising your rights and choices. However, some of the functionality and features of our services may change or no longer be available to you. End quote. So basically, they give you, in their words, certain controls, but only on their say so. And this includes basic things like updating or correcting details. You can also opt out of notifications and promotions and ask for your data to be deleted, but it will result in a likely denial of service. This is all quite standard, and you will find many similar wordings again in other locations, but it is interesting to see where choices have been made. For example, a standard form online is, "We may offer you certain controls and choices," whereas Nintendo has removed the modal verb and gone with simply, "We offer you," which is probably safe for them to do given the scope of their services, which means that they will always have at least some options to change name and alter data without risking legal challenge from people saying, "Well, no, you don't, there's no functionality for that." Next up then, information retention and information security. Your information will only be retained as long as reasonably necessary for the purposes set out in this privacy policy and in accordance with applicable law. We have implemented administrative, physical, and technical security measures that are designed to protect your information from loss, theft, misuse, unauthorized access, disclosure, alteration, and destruction. You should understand, though, that despite our efforts, no security can be guaranteed as impenetrable. Please note that information collected by third parties may not have the same security protections as information you submit to us, and we are not responsible for protecting the security of such information. End quote. Right, so administrative, physical, and technical security measures. This relates to three standard categories of controls available. Administrative controls include parental controls, account management policies, as well as Nintendo's own hiring and termination policies, data classification, audits of logs, and business contingency planning for incidents and other situations. Technical controls, though, include keeping data safe through firmware updates, suspicious login detection, encryption, and digital rights management. Then we have physical controls, which would include regular patches on the software, maintaining data centers and server rooms that are secure, and having anti-tampering devices such as their moves against jailbreaking. They also naturally admit that nobody's perfect, but in this case, I think it's reasonable to trust that Nintendo will do their best to keep this information safe, if only because the reputational damage to them from a failure is significant, as they are not just a tech company, but a company trusted with the data, particularly of families and children. Speaking of whom, let's read section 6. Information about children. We do not knowingly collect, use, or share information from children under a certain age without parental consent or as permitted by law, e.g., a child is under the age of 13 in the United States, under the age of 14 in Quebec, etc. Where a parent or legal guardian has provided consent, the child may be able to use his or her Nintendo account to play certain third-party games and applications that are not published by Nintendo. Parents or guardians may review, modify, or delete your child's information or withdraw consent by contacting us using the contact information provided at the end of this privacy policy, and may manage which third-party games and applications can access or use the child's Nintendo account information through your Nintendo account profile settings, end quote. The etc. here, after a 13 in the United States, 14 in Quebec, does a lot of work in classifying children, as although these examples are both within the Americas, it does suggest that this same standard must be used elsewhere, as it's surely a legal baseline. The rest of the document confirms that Nintendo can make changes, and they will update you by email and list the changes for simplicity, and they confirm that Nintendo have received certification for their privacy standards. As they say, this privacy policy and the certification seal located on our websites that link to this policy confirms that we are a valid licensee and participating member of the Entertainment Software Ratings Board Privacy Certified Program. To help protect your privacy, we have voluntarily undertaken this privacy initiative. As a licensee in this privacy certification program, we are subject to frequent audits of our websites and other enforcement and accountability mechanisms administered independently by the ESRB. All of our sites containing the ESRB certification seal have been reviewed and certified by ESRB to meet established online information collection and use practices. End quote. At the end, there is contact information for Nintendo of America. So look, this is either a horrific Orwellian nightmare or fairly bog standard, depending on your perspective on these matters, but I think it will be interesting to look at the European equivalent by way of comparison. Now, I won't go line by line, but I think there are some very interesting differences to be pointed out. First of all, these data concerns in the EU are governed by GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, applicable to countries within the EU, as well as the UK, which transferred most European regulations into UK law when it left the EU. This affects the content in both obvious and subtle ways. For example, Recital 38, Article 12 of GDPR requires that rules about children should be clear and accessible, and good practice also dictates that this information is prominently placed, so the EU policy starts by a clear notification that, if you, as the holder of parental responsibility, register a Nintendo account on behalf of your child, the personal data of your child is collected, processed, and used in accordance with this privacy policy. Where your child is below the age of 16 years and where the legal basis for the processing of the personal data is a consent pursuant to Article 6, Paragraph 1 of GDPR, consent must be given or authorized by you as the holder of parental responsibility via the parental consent mechanism provided for by Nintendo. Basically, it's your choice. Don't blame the kid. That last bit was me, not the policy. Next, they go into the information that is being collected, and these are classified rather differently, and the wording is far more specific. While the American document says that information collected may include information like your name, email address, and so on, the European policy is far more granular about what is collected and why, listing specific reasons for each data item for account services, shopping services, etc., from funds to your wish list. All this is quite general to the shopping experience, but the really key bit for most people will be how the Switch and Switch 2 themselves harvest data, and this section delves into exactly what they collect. To enable the connection of the user device to Nintendo servers, we may collect and process technical information related to your user device, such as MAC address, IP address, serial number, or other alphanumeric codes associated to your user device or assigned to the applications you use. We may also collect and process information about the settings of the user device to optimize your experience, such as country settings, language settings, parental control settings, and wireless access point information of the user device. We may also collect and process screen resolution and other display preferences of the user device. When you purchase digital products, Nintendo of Europe will collect and process information about the user device linked to your Nintendo account for fraud prevention purposes. Finally, the date of the initial boot up is recorded and saved on certain user devices, depending on the type and the version of the device, i.e., the date on which you start up the user device for the first time, initial boot update. The initial boot update may be transmitted to Nintendo Company Limited and processed there for the purposes of analyzing errors, carrying out repair work on your user device, or product improvement. End quote. Clearly, the European regulations won't necessarily apply as the same in the US, but it still makes sense to think that Nintendo would homogenize their standards as far as possible across the globe, and so I think we can expect that this is representative of what is happening in other territories as well, even if it doesn't need to be included directly into their blurb. I also think it's interesting that they specify that this data is going to Nintendo Company Limited, or NCL, which is usually used to distinguish it from the regional subsidiaries. I'm not sure legally whether this prevents them from distributing data to regional partners. For example, a lot of their technical research is done in Paris at NERD, and they also have had technical development from Nintendo Technology Development in Redmond, America. I think this next section really gets into the specific new concerns about Game Chat. To enable you to enjoy content, products, and services available within the Nintendo account service, NCL processes data related to your activities, such as the username and alphanumeric codes assigned to your Nintendo account, registered phone number, the name, appearance, and profile of the Mii character that represents you in the Nintendo server's account, and nicknames and IDs that you use in various applications, friends and favorites that you registered, Nintendo account users you played with, user-generated content that you uploaded, posted, or otherwise made available in the Nintendo account service, your online presence information, your gameplay history, and other data specific to games and applications that you use. We may also collect your activity history data, such as what games you played and what applications you used on your user device, at what times you played games or used applications, your current level, score, and in-game location, information you submitted when participating in surveys, and crash reports. Feature-specific communication content, such as video and voice chats, may be recorded and stored for up to 24 hours on the user devices of all users participating in a chat. This enables users to report potentially inappropriate interactions that may infringe applicable laws and/or Nintendo Code of Conduct. So, Nintendo knows not just which games you're playing, but where you are in these games, when you access them, and what is happening within them. And personally, I'm quite comfortable with Nintendo developers being able to see in granular detail when people are going wrong or getting confused or jumping out of a game, or even to some degree when they're logging on. As regards feature-specific communication content, it says that they may be recorded and stored, but not that they are recorded and stored by default. This is understandable as it's a huge server issue to store all of that streaming video, but I imagine for their own legal standing, they would aim to keep a record. It confirms that all users participating will be recorded. The purpose given here is so that users can report, and this is fair enough in some ways as it actually goes to a different issue competing with privacy concerns, which is, of course, safety. Nintendo wants to build a safe community, and so being able to report within 24 hours seems like a reasonable safeguard. Quite where you strike this balance will be different for different people, but a window of a day to process a complaint before the chat is deleted seems fair enough. However, it seems from later on in Section 3 that Nintendo will offer a 3-minute review option so you can go back and report something specific. This is detailed in Section 3.3 where it says, if you give your consent and use certain functions of the Nintendo account service, communication content such as video and voice chats may be recorded and stored on your user device for a limited period of time. If you encounter any language or behavior that may violate applicable laws, the Nintendo Account Agreement or NOE's community guidelines, you may review the last 3 minutes of the relevant recorded communication content on your user device and report it to NCL. In this case, the communication content, if it was stored on the user device and other information about the chat session, e.g. the time and date of the chat, camera usage, and traffic details, will be transmitted to NCL servers in order to support a safe and family-friendly online environment and to detect violations of the Nintendo Account Agreement and other harmful or illegal interactions. Nintendo may analyze the communication content and data transmitted and, if necessary, compare it with other data such as the previous verification history and other Nintendo account information of the user concerned. Under certain circumstances, Nintendo may also disclose specific information to third parties, such as authorities, courts, or lawyers. The legal basis for this data processing is your consent, Article 6, Paragraph 1 of GDPR. If you do not agree to the above data processing or withdraw your consent, you will not be able to use the corresponding Nintendo account service anymore. The same applies if you, as the holder of parental responsibility, having registered a Nintendo account on behalf of your child, refuse or withdraw your consent to the processing of your child's data. End quotes. So note that the terms of the restriction are set quite broadly. Behavior that may violate applicable laws is not the same as actually breaking the laws, and of course, they also add in both the account agreement and the community guidelines, giving them far broader scope in terms of what they can intervene with. As ever, Nintendo is applying a wide margin of safety to ensure people are compliant with Nintendo's expectations of conduct. The fact that they take not just the recording, but time, data, traffic details, and camera usage may be relevant for potential legal proceedings, but also presumably allows them to detect illicit access or tampering. There are other sections related to third parties, the use of cookies, and it also highlights the impact of Google Analytics, Google reCAPTCHA, and how some web services require information on the device settings. One rather interesting addition, though, is that they are specific about how information is handled in the event of a system transfer. They say, to provide system transfer and depending on the transfer method chosen on the original user device, NCL collects and processes all supported data stored on the original user device, including locally stored data linked to Nintendo account users, as well as the device settings of the original user device. Depending on the transfer method chosen, locally stored data will be deleted on the original user device. For further information about system transfer, please see the dedicated system transfer support page. If you use system transfer, please ensure that you inform all other Nintendo account users and local users of the original user device about your transfer before proceeding. End quote. Again, this seems reasonable given how people are interlinked frequently via family memberships of Nintendo Switch Online, but it's a nice safety measure that information is deleted off the device that's exporting the information during a transfer for those who wish to resell their machines without going into additional factory resets. The third section of the EU Nintendo accounts policy goes into how the information is used and the purpose of processing, and they have clear bullet points at the start of this section covering the major areas, which are generally quite standard. Using the account, using your device, providing content and services, processing orders, and providing customer support. Mind you, providing you content gives them a broad remit to use your data in game development. There is an awful lot here about specific uses of data, such as phone data being used as part of two-step verification. They also note that you can opt out of marketing messages, and this is highlighted in bold in compliance with best practice. I think we can skip over a lot of this. However, I want to next delve into the section titled Who Has Access to Your Information. Recall that in the American document, they took for themselves the right to pass your data around their subsidiaries. These rules are a lot more guarded. Mentioned a few times is Article 6, Paragraph 1 of GDPR, so I will explain this briefly first. It is a list of 6 principles for why data processing is lawful, which is basically if you give consent, if it's part of the contract, if it's part of a legal obligation, if it's needed to protect someone else's interests, if it's needed for a task of public interest, or if it's required for the legitimate interests of the company subject to rights, freedoms, and in particular, regulations concerning children. With that in mind, let's have a look at some key sections of Nintendo's document. The legal basis for this sharing of your information is Article 6, Paragraph 1 of GDPR. We have a legitimate interest in sharing your information for internal administrative purposes, in particular to offer the Nintendo account service and to deal with any inquiries in an efficient and high-quality manner. You have the right to object on the grounds relating to your particular situation at any time to such sharing. To exercise this right, you may at any time contact us as provided in Section 9 of this privacy policy. Where Nintendo of Europe shares your information with NCL located in Japan, appropriate safeguards for an adequate level of data protection are provided for by standard data protection clauses that have been adopted by the European Commission and that have been entered into between Nintendo of Europe and NCL. NCL and Nintendo of Europe may also share your information with other entities of the Nintendo Group to be used in accordance with this privacy policy, in particular with our European branches in France, the Netherlands, Belgium, Italy, Austria, Switzerland, Portugal, Spain, and the United Kingdom, Nintendo of America Incorporated, located in the United States, as well as Nintendo Australia Proprietary Limited, located in Australia, and Nintendo of Korea Company Limited, located in the Republic of Korea. The level of data protection provided under the US, Australian, and Korean law is lower than the level provided in the European Community. If NOE and or NCL shares your information with Nintendo of America Inc., with Nintendo Australia, or with Nintendo of Korea, appropriate safeguards for an adequate level of data protection are provided for by standard data protection clauses that have been adopted by the European Commission and that have been entered into between NOE and Nintendo of America, Nintendo Australia, and well, let's end the quote there, as I won't list all the combinations, but as we've seen, there are a few. Right then, there's a lot going on here. Their assertion for the use of data is to do with internal administrative purposes, in particular to offer the Nintendo account service and to deal with any inquiries in an efficient and high quality manner. It also confirms that there are differences in the treatment of data between the EU and other countries where Nintendo has subsidiaries. While my expectations would be that they might standardize their data processes as far as possible, this document explicitly says, and probably would say anyway as a matter of legal rectitude, that Nintendo actually have internal processes to ensure data safeguards apply correctly going from the EU to the rest of the world in compliance with their legal obligations. This does raise the possibility, though, that the 3-minute review and 24-hour storage is reserved for the EU, however, as no such timeframe exists in the US document. It also means that if Nintendo is treating its consumers on a differential basis with regard to monitoring, it may be that investigations will focus on non-European markets, and so certain user difficulties that might be specific to particular languages, especially when it comes to either loose or overzealous censorship, may be more difficult to correct on a system-wide level. On the other hand, it leaves fewer hostages to fortune in terms of potential abuse. That said, remember that these documents are not necessarily a precise point-by-point breakdown of what Nintendo are doing, but what they are asserting that they are allowed to do, and so to offer themselves maximum legal cover, they will draw their terms as widely as they can without risking the ire of their consumer base. Practicality would suggest that they would aim for processes that fit everyone worldwide, if only to save money and standardize. Further sections relate to how Nintendo may share information with third-party consumer support services, including hardware repairs services subcontracted from Nintendo, and that they share content delivery network providers. The list of these providers in the US is Akamai Technologies, Amazon Web Services, CD Networks Japan, and Limelight Networks in the US, although the structure of this privacy document would permit these companies to be expanded without a notified change in the policy. What about storage duration? Section 7 has you covered here. I quote, "We will only store your information as long as necessary to fulfill the purposes for which the information is collected and processed, or where the applicable law provides for longer storage and retention period for the storage and retention period required by law. After that, your personal data will be deleted." In particular, if you terminate your Nintendo account by deleting your Nintendo account in the account settings, or by contacting us as provided in Section 9 of this privacy policy, your personal data will be deleted. Please note that Nintendo of Europe is required to retain certain transactional data from Nintendo shopping services you have used under statutory, commercial, and tax law for a period of up to 10 years. If you exercise a right to object to the processing of your personal data, we will delete your personal data that we processed for the purpose of which you objected without undue delay, unless another legal basis for processing and retaining this data exists, or unless applicable laws require us to retain the data." End quote. The rest of the document asserts rights that the consumer has under the GDPR regulations, deals with redress, and gives the address details of both the NCL and NOE data protection officers. Of course, this covers Europe and America, but what about Japan? Not being a Japanese speaker, it's rather difficult to navigate Nintendo's Japanese websites, as I'm reliant on machine translation tools to get my bearings. One document appears to list the classes of data retrieved as identity, e.g. age, language, address, purchase history and usage, behavioral data from services or apps, communication and inquiries with customer support, location data and device-specific identifiers, advertising and marketing interactions, analytical information for services improvement. Generally, Japan's data regulations are perceived to be a kind of midpoint between the consumer focus of Europe and the business operations focus of America. Obviously, either route has trade-offs and benefits. The stronger privacy safeguards in Europe also mean some data being retained for 10 years and likely more hidden costs in compliance, while the American rules do far less to reassure customers for whom privacy is a concern, while allowing companies greater operational flexibility, which may keep down costs and allow them to more freely exploit market opportunities. It's also worth noting that while Japan does have penalties in place for data abuse, the EU fines for mishandling can be 20 million euros or 4% of a company's global turnover. All things considered then, having looked through these policies, what have we learned? First of all, Nintendo's policies may be exhaustive, but they are broadly standard in a world where data is big business in itself and very difficult to truly guard. In the American context, they use the ESRB framework as an auditing tool to give confidence to customers, and in places they have opted for language that is more consumer friendly than they might otherwise have done. But they're not leaving themselves open to litigation, and so they're still drawing their terms quite broadly in terms of what they can do, in recognition of the fact that they and third parties connected to them benefit extensively from using this data, which basically allows them to join up your searches and specific interests to where specifically you got stuck in a game, to your credit card details and your unique click patterns as you navigate Nintendo content. With respect to game chat specifically, it appears that the 3-minute reflection time and the 24-hour retention in place in Europe may be standard across different regions, but there's no policy basis for this in their privacy agreements, and it's quite possible that extensive monitoring could be taking place from Nintendo for non-European users of game chat services. That said, server limitation issues may mean that storage of more than 24 hours might be rare, so in practice, it's unlikely that footage of you will be held on Nintendo servers for all that long. This does have immense complexities, though, and I do spare a thought for the people whose responsibility it will be to adjudicate such matters, given that it is a tragic inevitability. Given that over the very, very long term, it is almost a tragic inevitability that given enough time, the cameras will pick up things ranging from the inappropriate to the illegal to the truly horrifying. It will be interesting to see how privacy issues and monitoring issues are managed when Game Chat does get on its feet. While working on this video, one issue people have expressed concern about, besides the privacy implications, is Nintendo's ability to brick your Switch. And while this isn't covered in the privacy documentation, I may do a shorter deep dive of the account agreement at some point as well, if people are interested. For now, though, big thanks to the channel's patron supporters for helping keep this channel on the road. Thank you for watching, liking, sharing, and subscribing, and I shall see you next time for another Nintendo Forecast.